Hello and welcome to this second video in my short series looking at the history of the Church of St Mary the Virgin in the village of Farleigh in Surrey, England. Before I go any further, I want to say a huge thank you to Tony and particularly to Elizabeth, who've been very kind in helping me to put this film together. Elizabeth has actually opened the church specially for us today, so we're very fortunate to have special access to have a look around inside. So without any further ado, let's do that. We'll start by going in through this 18th century porch. And that reveals immediately an 11th century Norman arch. Let's go inside the church now. So immediately we are met with a stunning interior. There is the door to the vestry, which we saw outside in the first video. And what I want to look at in particular, as we go down through the church to start with, is a window that you'll just see coming onto your screens now. Let's take a closer look. It says, "To the glory of God and in memory of the men of this parish who made this supreme sacrifice for king and country in the Great War, 1914 to 1918. And as you can see, there are also some military badges around the window. And of particular note is that this window sadly was vandalised in the 1960s, but this particular replacement was installed in 2010, and the helmet there belonged to Elizabeth's father. He used that in World War II, probably during, she believes, civil defence duties, but the hat itself is contemporary with World War I. So isn't that a lovely thing to have incorporated into this window? A total of 7 men are commemorated on these tablets, a by no means insignificant number given the very small size of the village. There's Herbert Edwards, William Thomas Matthews and Charles William Neville of the Royal West Surrey Regiment, Alfred Smith of the East Surrey Regiment, Frank William Verrill and Wilfred Witts of the Royal Engineers, and George Thomas Smith of the Dorsetshire Regiment. Moving on from the stained glass window, past the pulpit and the choir stalls, the next item that I want to show you is this hole in the wall just here. This is an aumbrey and would have been used for the storage of items such as the bread and wine during communion. Now you'll notice that it sits a remarkable distance from the altar, and that might appear a little strange, but there is a very good historical reason for that. The original 11th century church had the altar just here, and you may recall, if you saw my previous video when I looked at the outside of the church, that this chancel end was extended by about 10 feet during the 13th century. And one of the consequences of that was that the aumbrey finished up some distance from the present altar. On the wall just next to it, here, is an item that is believed to be 15th century. This is the memorial to one of the lords of the manor, and would have originally, of course, been set into the floor. We'll have a look at the altar now and the stained glass. Just next to the altar is a memorial in Latin to Reverend Samuel Bernard and his wife Elizabeth. This stone used to cover their burial place within the church, but is now set into the north wall of the chancel. Whilst there isn't time to cover Samuel's story in detail in this video, it is worth mentioning that he was Vicar of Croydon during the first half of the 17th century, a period of enormous religious and political upheaval in the British Isles. During the English Civil War, Samuel refused to subscribe to what was known as the Solemn League and Covenant. This would have required him to adopt a stricter and more puritanical form of Protestant worship and discontinue his use of the Book of Common Prayer. Samuel was eventually stripped of his office and even imprisoned for a time. He set up a new home for himself and his family in the village of Whaddon near Croydon, but refused to change his religious beliefs. At great personal risk, Samuel continued to hold religious services using the Book of Common Prayer. And his church of choice? St Mary's at Farleigh, even though he was never the vicar here. Whatever your own views might be, there's no question that Samuel Bernard stuck faithfully to his religious beliefs, and the third line of his memorial, when translated into English, is quite telling. It reads, "A faithful pastor, and a man defiled by no covenant." Looking around, you may have noticed that you haven't so far seen a font. Now, this church has had a series of perfectly normal, standard-sized fonts over the centuries, but today it's home to one of the smallest you will see anywhere, and it's just over here. There we go, in the wall. And Elizabeth has explained to me that this was installed in the 1960s because of internal changes made at the church. The font would have originally been by the door of the church, but that's where the organ now stands. So the font couldn't stay there, and eventually it was decided to go for something smaller and to fit it in just here. So it's something of a claim to fame now, I would say. One of the smallest fonts. This very beautiful stained glass window just here, which is dedicated to Saint Cecilia, the patron saint of musicians, holds a very sad story. It says, "In loving memory of Derek Reginald Salt, 9th of May 1954, aged 22, organist of this church." And Elizabeth was explaining to me that sadly, on that fateful day, he was on his way here to play the organ at a service and was killed in a road traffic accident. As we make our way back towards the door, let's have one more look around inside and also look up to take in some of that beautiful ceiling as well. If you'd like to know more about St Mary's, or perhaps visit, please take a look at the church website, the link for which you'll find in the description field for this video. Also, the church holds regular services every Sunday in a traditional format, so if you live near Farleigh or are visiting the area, why not pop by? The folks here will certainly give you a warm welcome. So that concludes our tour of the interior of the Church of St Mary the Virgin in Farleigh in Surrey, England. I hope you've enjoyed seeing this beautiful and wonderfully peaceful place. Please join me again in the next video when I'll be having a look around at the churchyard. In the meantime, please subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you again soon.